No, that's not the game we're playing, is to save as much money as possible. If that's the game, you're going to lose because you're going to save a bunch of money and you're still going to have that for what question that's going to reverberate for the rest of your life.
Welcome to Becoming Ourselves, a work in progress podcast where we explore how to become healthy, wealthy, and wise. This podcast is for young adults who are, like us, navigating this adult adolescence of self-discovery and personal growth.
I'm Jesse Sigrist, and every week, my brother Joel and I will bring on guests to talk about new perspectives on living a fulfilling life and developing skills along the way. From overcoming obstacles to setting achievable goals, we explore topics that are relevant to all young adults who are discovering their place in the world.
Maya Angelou defined success as liking yourself, liking what you do, and liking how you do it. We often feature guests to exemplify this success and lead lives that are healthy, wealthy, and wise. These guests will often have expertise in fields such as finance, relationships, careers, or mental and physical health. Our goal is to inspire and challenge both our listeners and each other to become the best versions of ourselves.
Feel free to text us at 503-893-2664 to share your own experiences and be part of the conversation. We'll always reply. Let's embark on this journey of becoming ourselves together. All right, welcome. Welcome back to Becoming Ourselves. We've got a really special guest here today, Ryan Halley, one of the professors of financial planning at George Fox University, which is my soon-to-be alma mater. So Ryan has been my professor for countless classes at this point, definitely a mentor who I look up to a lot and has taught me most everything I know about finance. So a really influential person in my life. In addition to teaching, Ryan currently works as the Vice President of Financial Wellness at Rivermark Community Credit Union. Previously, he has worked as a financial planner, wealth manager, financial consultant, and leadership development program director. He earned a doctorate in personal financial planning from Texas Tech and an MBA from The Ohio State University, as well as being a CFP certificate. He has been instrumental in developing the first CFP board-registered financial planning undergraduate degree in Oregon. So welcome, Ryan. Thank you so much for hopping on here with us.
Well, thank you, Jesse and Joel. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, really excited. Ryan, it's been a little while since we've talked, so excited to have you on the call.
It has. Well, it's certainly it's one of the joys of this profession. Joel is getting to reconnect with students, and it's amazing how you just instantly transport back to conversations and classes, and always enjoyed those moments with you. So really good to reconnect here.
Definitely. Yeah, I remember we had an 8 a.m. class Tuesdays and Thursdays the spring semester of my senior year, and I was there sometimes.
That's called bad scheduling, Joel.
It was one of the last required business classes. I needed to fit it in. It was the only time, and I was like, I'll go enough that I can learn some stuff.
I'm glad you remember it.
So let's hop into a little bit. Ryan, one of your big things that you talk about is behavioral finance, which is just financial psychology, super interesting topic. What are some common finance traps that people inadvertently fall into?
Well, I like the use of the word traps there, because that's exactly what happens with these behavioral phenomenon or behavioral tendencies. You know, I think the biggest trap that I see is just not even acknowledging that there's a huge piece of my behavior that shows up in all of my life, but certainly within my financial decisions. And I think the biggest trap, to summarize, is we treat our financial lives like it's a mathematical equation, like it's something scientific, and we don't give full appreciation to the fact that it's a human on the other side of this equation. So somebody's got to live this out, and in my case, that would be me, or a client that needs to go through that. And you know, we know that upwards of 90% of our financial decisions are made from the emotional center. So you know, I
upwards
think that's
of 90%.
Yeah, 90% made with the limbic system. So, you know, they're typically subconscious. We don't even know we're making them. They tend to be responses to stimuli and made heuristically throughout the day. And so it gets scarier the more you realize that, because you realize how much you're on autopilot most of the time.
So are you saying the Excel spreadsheet that plans out my retirement and the rest of my life isn't actually making all the decisions?
No, I don't. I would say it's not making any of the decisions. It's informing the human that has to behave in a way that activates or operationalizes the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And it perplexes those of us who are even closest to it. I just find that the trap is typically minimizing the amount of my own human tendencies, my own personality, my own fears, my own family of origin, my own you name it, whatever informs the emotional piece. Underestimating that is a trap.
Yeah. No, that's obviously really wise. I absolutely agree and have lived out that exactly myself. Even knowing a lot of these finance traps, having a financial planning degree, I still find myself making emotional decisions because that looks like a great pair of shoes. It might not be something I wear, but it's a great deal or it looks cool or something like that, even if it's not in the budget, things like that.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's part of the danger, Jesse, what you just mentioned there, because the solve is not to eliminate emotion. We were created to be emotional beings, and that's a gift that we were given. So it's not about eliminating the emotion; it's about getting on top of the emotion, right? Like what is informing this decision, and do I want to let it inform this financial decision, or how might it get in the way of this? So I think there's an awareness and there's just an appreciation for who I am as a human and how that's going to show up in the way that I lead my financial life.
Yeah. Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. It's about, empowering yourself to be intentional with the emotional decisions versus letting the emotions just drive everything.
It's a good word.
Yeah. Do you find this is different? I know you work a lot with young couples and do some financial counseling for college students, right? But do you find this is different in couples and how that plays out versus individuals on their own or single people?
Yeah, I'm kind of laughing to myself because you've probably heard me say, when working in a financial planning or counseling or therapeutic way with a individual, it's a whole lot easier than taking that within the context of more than one person. And most of that I think you could probably chalk up to the interaction effect, the fact that we're not just looking at one particular mode of operation, but we're probably looking at an entire family system that's playing out here. So, I think as far as it pertains to behavioral, the behavioral element is typically at the individual level. So I've got my own set of behaviors, my own set of emotions, my own life experience that informs the way I show up in life. So if another person enters the conversation, or in this case, the financial planning or financial conversation, now we've got multiple people's behavior that show up. So, I think complexity comes to mind, Jesse. It's not necessarily something that the couple brings. I find it's the fact that the couple involves two people and they each bring those behavioral tendencies with them. And so really need to explore what those are for both individuals and how they might play out in the context of how they jointly manage their financial lives.
Yeah, that's super rich. Just showing that, I don't know, I find this often comes to play because people have, again, these emotional decisions, and then the emotions within a relationship tie together super strongly. Often the financial part is not what's talked about because it's not the fun part.
Yeah,
and so
right.
it just kind of, it can be an exponent as well. The emotions drive the decision even more strongly, right?
What are some maybe like prompts that you would provide for young couples that are bringing that like emotional background, bringing that emotional complexity into it, that maybe haven't talked about finance a lot and now are finding themselves newly married and needing to deal with finances?
Yeah, one go-to question that I typically lead with is, what was money like for you growing up? I find that to be a very open-ended question that typically explores all over that particular theme of what kinds of behavioral or emotional elements pertaining to money are going to show up. The idea of money attitudes is a big topic for me because the world that I work in, financial planning, financial coaching, we always focus on behavior. All of our focus is on behavior. Stop doing this, start doing this, eliminate this, transition this, right? It's all about behavior. But behaviors never just come about. Behaviors are always extensions of attitude, like the way I believe or feel or think about something. And so, to borrow what Jesse said earlier, if I'm going to be deliberate or intentional, the best chance I have at that is to understand the attitude that's underlying the behavior. So, I think that's where I try to go, is to try to figure out what are some of the attitudes that likely stem from that what was money like for you growing up question. We're not born with attitudes, and attitudes are acquired over time, and many of our attitudes were acquired through our family of origin, our family system growing up. And so it's amazing how much you can find out and discover and almost predict from the answer to that question about early life experiences relative to money that then can show up in subsequent questions, or being able to anchor to something that is more emotional when it shows up later in the conversation.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, no, that definitely, I don't know, makes a lot of sense. That it really sets, it's a lot of the nurture. I think financial counseling, financial psychology is a lot more nurture than nature. And it has so much to do with, I remember an exercise we did in your class, one of your early classes, of like what were the explicit messages you were told as a kid, and then what were the implicit messages you were told as a kid. Yeah. And a couple people had these big breakthroughs about like explicitly, it's like be generous, be giving all the time. But then the implicit, more unspoken message is kind of a, save all your money, don't spend it, don't give it. It's more worth it. It does more work for you if you keep it, and all these things. So there's these tensions that are hard to explore, that are hard to notice when you're not thinking about it, when you're not exploring that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those implicit rules are powerful because those are the modeling behavior, right? It's the things that imprinted on me because I saw them done over and over and over again. And you point out a conundrum that a lot of people face, and that is that whole do what I say, not what I do phenomenon, where there's inconsistency between what I say and what I actually see done. And that can create a lot of confusion early on. It's like, which one is it? To use your example, am I supposed to be generous, or am I supposed to use most of my resources on self-consumption? Like, how do I reconcile that as, say, an 8-year-old? That's too much. And so we carry some of those, I'd say most all of those things with us. I think, Joel, to come back to your question, another thing that I often will try to do is get to the feeling behind a particular statement, behavior, something that's more surface level. So, a simple question of like, how does that make you feel? Is a pretty powerful question, because now you're evoking that limbic system, right? Tell me about the motion behind this recommendation to save 10% of your income, right? Because that's the behavior. But what I want to know is, I feel like I can't do that. I feel like if I do, it's going to take the fun out of my life. I feel like, I'm going to revert back to some of the behaviors that I saw my dad do. So, that's where you really get the gold, is what's the feeling behind this particular topic or implementation step that we're talking about.
That's where it can get dicey too. That's where it can get like defensive, and those sorts of things can start to come up because those feelings are, in some cases, not things that have been talked about before, not things that have been processed through. Yeah.
Well, that's why we don't want to go there, right? Another thing that Jesse's heard me say in class is you only really get the real answer after you stop talking. And so, letting someone answer, but then asking them, tell me more about that. What you typically do is you send a clear message that we're not just going to take the surface level response, but we're going to dig a little bit. And, I would say that's a defense mechanism in most of us, is to try to deflect, avoid, minimize the amount of emotional investment in this conversation until I'm forced to go there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think about that one quite a bit in just soft skills, listening, anything like that, because, it's kind of a played out stereotype of, I think, Western culture. It's like, when you say, how are you, you don't actually mean it. And I think we find the same thing even in the helping professions and having real conversations. It's like, we're going to start out at that level. How are you? Good. Tell me more. Or how does that make you feel? Fine. Okay, tell me more. Well, actually, and you can really dig in and find fundamental change there.
Yeah, when you start getting to the good stuff, and there's a reason for it. Again, it's not easy. It's hard. We're conditioned to answer with the I'm fine because that typically works. And we know that most people don't want to go there anyway because it's hard on both sides of the equation. Yeah. Like Joel said, that's hard. It is hard because you don't know what's going to happen. That's when anxiety is elevated. That's when grief tends to be elevated, right? All of these emotions that I may not necessarily know what I'm asking for when I'm digging a little bit on trying to find the source.
Yeah.
I have a box of tissues in my office for a reason.
Absolutely.
I bet you go through it. Yeah.
It can be a surprise when it takes that turn as well. I mean, sometimes you have 5, 6, 7 conversations with normal, quote unquote, but pretty baseline things. And then just one question, just one thing strikes the right nerve or the wrong nerve or whatever. And wow, that's a big cry. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for listening. If you have any thoughts or questions, text us at 503-893-2664. Now, back to the show.
So switching to, a couple more practical questions that I think I find when I'm talking to my friends who are 22, 21, starting a financial journey, but are hearing a lot of messages and not hearing a lot of facts, maybe. One of the things I hear most is like the next thing I'm going to do, or the scariest thing I can imagine, is get a credit card. And either it's I'm not going to get a credit card because my parents said I should never do that, or Dave Ramsey saying something very, no debt, all debt is bad debt, something like that, or just this is going to be the key to all my problems. How should young adults be thinking about that? How can we frame that in a helpful way?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing I would want to do, and I often do, is try to deconstruct the scary part. So, tell me more about the fear. What scares you? What is the outcome that concerns you? And only then can we start to deal with the fear, because the fear presents like as a commodity, right? Fear is universal until we start to figure out what that fear actually is. We can start to think about then what is valid fear and what might be invalid fear within this particular scenario. I think there's a lot of valid fear when it comes to a credit card. So I'm a big proponent of building credit early, but building credit requires using credit. And if using credit is going to create debt that, is mismanaged, then I would say don't build credit. So it's trying to uncover what is the fear. What do I know about myself? Going back to the behavioral tendencies, maybe I'm an impulsive spender or I'm an emotional spender that is typically constrained by only having so much money in my checking account. And if I got a credit card, I might predict that could be a disaster because I'm always going to have access to this emotional spending. And so, I think that's where I would appreciate that scary piece. For a lot of individuals, it doesn't stop at that. It's trying to figure out, how do I build structure and boundaries around my use of this credit so that I can assure myself that I'm not going to, slip into whatever that fear scenario is. So, a lot of times I'll talk about only using that credit card for certain purchases. Gasoline is a great example for somebody starting with a credit card because your credit limit's going to be low anyway when you start out. And so just put gasoline on the car because you're going to know whether or not you're buying gasoline or not. And most people aren't going to buy more gasoline because they have a credit card, right? It's more of a utility purchase that's going to show up when I need it. And then things like pay off the credit card in full at the end of the cycle. And if you ever reach a point where you can't pay it off in full before the due date, then stop using the credit card, right? So just build some internal controls within the process that help mitigate that fear, but also appreciate where that fear actually comes from.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. A very concise way to put it. And, often think about a credit card as like a tool. A tool is not inherently good or bad. It's typically there because it has a use. It is useful in some sense. But if I'm using a hammer, well, that's a good thing in certain scenarios. And it could really help me if I'm building a house. But if I'm, making a painting, I probably don't even need it. And it's going to be used in some places and definitely not in others. But
yeah, that's good imagery. I think it's very accurate when it comes to credit. It's a tool that we want to use to build a solid financial foundation. It can also wreck the foundation from the very beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is where a lot of the messaging comes from in our thing. We'll often hear a financial ruin. Well, often it has to do with X times the debt, so much debt that you can't get out of it, which is obviously scary and very valid fear. But
when you mentioned debt, that's another fear that often comes with credit. And I try to educate the differentiation of those two topics. So credit and debt are often used synonymously, and I think that's an error. Credit is good. We want to build credit, but we want to do it without incurring debt where it's not necessary or productive. So, trying to think through, because a lot of people just bundle those. Like, I don't know what to do with this credit thing because people are telling me I need credit, but they're also telling me not to go into debt. And so once we start to see them as one and the same, there's just a ton of dissonance because it's like, am I supposed to do it or am I supposed to not do it? When you start to break them apart, it becomes much easier. Credit is a do it, build credit, but try to minimize debt as much as possible. So the scenario that I just mentioned with the credit card is a way to use your credit line, but you're not incurring debt because you're paying it off in full at the end of that monthly cycle.
Yeah. Again, very, very clear. That makes more sense to me than I've heard in a while. So thank you.
Yep. So there are people talking about like good debt versus bad debt, that like a mortgage is also a kind of debt, right? That like you're probably not buying a house in cash. Like if you're buying a house, you're probably taking on a mortgage, and that's considered, or I've heard that called good debt versus credit card debt being bad debt. What would make something good debt versus bad debt, and how does like a credit card play into that conversation?
Yeah. I think the answer to that question depends on who you ask. There are a lot of sources that are out there that will try to distinguish between good debt and bad debt. Even the topic consumer debt introduces the idea that now we're not talking about all debt. We're only talking
Mm.
about a portion of debt. Consumer debt would be all debt outside of a mortgage or a student loan. So those two would fall outside of that. And the primary reason is those are appreciating assets. So I'm
Mm.
borrowing money to pay for something that is likely going to go up in value. So many individuals, and I would align with that is a better form of debt when I'm buying something that could be perceived as an investment. Um,
Yeah.
I the better definition for me, Joel, has been: is this thing that I'm going into debt for, is it helping me achieve a financial life goal?
Hmm.
That to me adds another element to it that is even more detailed, because if I'm just buying a house or a college education because I think it's the thing to do, I would say that's not a real deliberate decision. It's being influenced by something. It may work out in my favor, but it feels pretty haphazard as to whether
Yeah.
it does or not. So I like to clarify it on like goal.
Hmm.
For everyone, we all have life goals, right? Things that we want to experience in life, things we want to own, right? Memories we want to make, trips we want to take. And money is always a means to an end. So I think the healthiest way to look at money is money by itself, just like Jesse said, is a tool. It has no value in itself. It always is what the money can do for us.
Hmm.
So it's about the trip, or it's about the car, or it's about the wedding, or it's about whatever we spend it on. And so I think, clearly coming back to a goal, a life goal, and then what's the financial goal that makes that life goal a reality? That's what financial planning really is. It's about
Hmm.
helping individuals and families discover what are your life goals, what financial goals will make those life goals possible, and how can we put a plan in place that gives you a chance to make those financial goals possible. And so for me, it's always coming back to goals. Like, do I know where I'm heading, what
Hmm.
destination I want to arrive at, and then is this debt equipping me to get there? If it is, then I would put it in the good debt column. If it's not, even if it's used for an appreciating asset, I would say it's a distraction. It's
Hmm.
taking me away from the things that are most important to me.
Yeah. Yeah, like if you want to, travel the world and live a month in every country, sort of a thing, taking on a mortgage
Yeah,
and buying a house is not helping you accomplish that goal.
that's correct. It's working against it, right? It's when people describe it as an anchor,
Hmm.
that's a very descriptive illustration, because that's what it is. It becomes something that uh, prohibits or makes it harder for me to move.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of the American dream, but not the personal dream all the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Hmm.
I always wonder where that, like, who came up with the American dream. I never see a name attached to the American dream. It's just complete. Like, I just completely take that, right, as if it's some kind of commandment in life that I'm supposed to follow. And I like that challenge of thinking about, that American dream or what I'm supposed to do, and holding it in tension with what do I want to do? What do I want my life to be about? How do I want to use my 20s?
Hmm.
Right? Whatever it is, like, that's my goal right now. And so, um, but I also think there's wisdom in appreciating where did that come from in the first place. So, like, home ownership, we've seen this a lot with millennials, where millennials are the first generation that I've come into contact with who's questioned a lot of that American dream. Like, do I
Yeah.
really want to own that house in my 20s? Do I really want that promotion? Because it's going to come with more headaches and greater responsibility and more working hours. Those are all true, and I really appreciate that level of intentionality.
Hmm.
But we have to hold that, relative to the idea that home ownership during an appreciating market becomes the greatest source of net worth for most individuals. It's the number one predictor of retirement readiness when you have your house paid off. So it really is about managing both of those tensions of what is the wisdom in this and what is also the wisdom in this, and how can I hold both of those in high regard and be able to integrate them where I can.
Yeah, that there's sometimes conflict between those, right? And that it takes coming back to that, is this helping me achieve a life goal? Like, well, your life goals are different than good old Uncle Sam's. And some of them may align, but they don't have to. And I think it takes that kind of like self-discovery to figure out, do I actually want to buy a house? Do I actually want to climb the corporate ladder? Do I actually want to own this nice car or whatever, rather than just, it's the next thing to do, like figuring out, is this helping me move towards the things that I want to do?
Yeah, we come up with these guiding principles at times and we just adopt them like our own. And, the one that Jesse's heard me mention quite a bit is this kind of anti-coffee campaign that somehow my profession as financial coaches and counselors have come up with. It's like, why are we so harsh on like Starbucks of the world? Like, why does that get such ire in a budget? Don't spend any money on coffee. And I think that's ridiculous. I think we should look at that through the same lens of what value does that coffee bring to my life? And if it's really valuable, then, I joke with students all the time, buy 2 of them. That just makes complete sense to me, that money is a means to an end. So why am I going to work in the first place? It should be to help enable a life that allows me to accomplish and experience the things that are most important to me.
Yeah, I love that one. I think about that all the time. Just, it's the headlines we've seen for years, like millennials, if they stop buying avocado toast, they'll own houses or whatever.
Yeah.
It's kind of a meme, but that's something I hear all the time. It's like, if you never get a drink at a restaurant, you'll save X money a month. Well, personally, I really like trying a funny drink at a restaurant or just having something that's not water. So it's worth the $3. Yeah, I could save money, but that's not worth it to me.
No, that's not the game we're playing, is to save as much money as possible. If that's the game, you're going to lose, because you're going to save a bunch of money and you're still going to have that for what question that's going to reverberate for the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard you also talk about, working with older generations, older folks, and that's often the question on the deathbed, or just even in retirement, in late retirement. It's like, to have this $4 million nest egg, why? I wish I would have done something different.
Yeah, the most tragic phrase I hear in my work is, when I retire, I'm going to. Right. So whatever is at the end of that phrase is going to be one of the most important things in their life. Right. Nobody says, when I retire, I want to take out the trash. It's always going to be something really important. Like, a very common one is, when we retire, we want to travel the globe. It's like, okay, so that's really important to you. And if you're telling me that when you're 30, you're telling me that you're going to delay for the next 35 years that really important thing, with the hopes that you're going to experience it in the same way you would today. Right? And that turns into those really tragic moments where life doesn't often go the way that we expect it to, and sometimes tragically it doesn't go the way we expect it to. And so we may not have the health that we once had. We won't. Things like the activities that we could take part in if we traveled at 30 versus 70. Do we have the people in our life that we want to experience those moments and memories with? So yeah, I'm a big pusher of not spending less, but spending in areas that is the whole reason why money is important to me in the first place.
Yeah. So speaking about like the ways that we're spending money, can we talk about budgets for a second? Budgets are
Sure.
something that I think get thrown around as some people say, like, you need to have a budget. I don't know if it was before we started recording or not, but we talked about kind of the Excel budgets that I stayed up late to make because tomorrow I'm going to reform my whole spending lives. And how can we kind of think about budgets in a way that, because that doesn't work, right? That's not an effective way to plan it. But what is kind of the role that a budget can and should play in someone's life?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the question is what it's a tool, again, like a lot of things that we talk about. And so, what am I trying to do with that tool? So, if I put together a budget, what's the purpose? If it's because somebody told me to do it, that's probably not a good reason, and it's probably not going to sustain very long. If it's because it gives me the best chance of achieving my life goal, then I kind of like that. That can be incentivizing. I, I, one of the things I do when I talk about budgeting is I just change the term. So, most people don't like the term budget. It has a negative connotation to it. It feels very restrictive. It's a lot like a diet where it's something that I know might be good for me, but I'm not going to enjoy any of this process, and I'm going to, kind of grit my teeth and grin and bear it kind of thing. That's a tough thing to take on for an extended period of time. So, just a minor change, like I call it a spending plan, and it may feel like I'm, just semantics and changing words, but I do think it has to be digestible at the beginning. I have to feel like it's in my best interest. Mindset really matters with a spending plan. And I think it's just that, Joel. It's like I can either live my financial life in a very random way, like I hope I end up here someday, or I can set a course of action that determines that I'm going to be there someday. Money is one of the very few areas in life where people don't do a lot of planning, and then they act surprised when they end up in a place that wasn't where they wanted to be. I often compare it to time. Like nobody would, go through a day or activity without a schedule and be surprised why they didn't do an errand. It's like, well, it wasn't on your to-do list. So shame on me. I should have put it on my list. And, whatever is on my list is going to get accomplished. And I never act like I'm surprised at the end of the day. Like, whoa, I stopped at the mailbox. It's like, well, that was something that I laid out and I planned to do in the first place. So, I think it's just a way to, keep a calendar or use a GPS device when I'm traveling. It's a tool that gives me the best chance to arrive at the place that I want to arrive at. So I think when we can see it through that lens, we see it less as something that's going to control me and something that's actually going to be a mechanism of control. It's going to allow me to be in control of my financial situation to the point that I get to arrive or get to achieve these certain goals in my life.
And kind of tracing back to an earlier point there is a spending plan is perfectly reasonable to have your morning cup of coffee. And that can have $25, $30 a week or, $60, $70 a month. And that's okay to spend. And when I have it in my spending plan, great. And then I never feel that shame in the Starbucks drive-through line. But if I have it in my budget, I feel like I have to cut it down and I have to take it out or just not plan for it. And then it's a much more negative emotion when I find myself in the Starbucks drive-through line or whatever.
Yeah, you bring up the word shame. I often use the word guilt here, but I think they're used synonymously here. And that is, if I don't have a budget, I have to guess a lot of times, like, am I wasting money at the Starbucks drive-through? Should I really be going out to eat tonight with my friend, right? So I've got this kind of phantom fear that's there because I don't know. If I did know, then I can be empowered to make that decision of like, I don't have to worry about this shame or guilt because I know that I'm still within the $50 that I budgeted for this particular category. So you're right, Jesse. I think it really frees up the cognitive load, the mental capacity to worry about things that are pretty black and white when you distill them down to a number.
Hmm. That reminds me, I had a friend when I was in school who, I think it was my freshman year, and he had a debit card. He didn't know how to check his balance on the debit card. And so every time we went anywhere to spend any money, he was always nervous because he was like, I don't know if I have the money there. I'm not sure if I'm out. I'm not sure if this is going to get declined or not. And so his method was just to never spend money. Anytime we could, he would try not to, or he would opt for, the less expensive item on the menu, even if he didn't want it as much, or opt for this or that, and just spent less money than anyone else that we hung out with because he never wanted to, because he didn't have any idea how much was there and if he was able to or not. And that kind of feels like a pretty extreme end of the budgeting side. But that is the extreme of having no spending plan. Every time you're spending any money, you're not sure if it's the right decision or not because you're having to guess it all.
Yeah, I wish it was a little more extreme than it probably is. I think that's a fairly common situation where I may not express it to you, you may not know it, but inside of me, speaking of emotion, I'm always in that state, right? Or somebody that's in that situation always experiences that level of financial anxiety because they don't know, and they're just dealing with that phantom that's there of ignorance. I say often ignorance is not bliss when it comes to money. It feels like it in the moment because I don't necessarily know that I want to see what my balance is, right, in my checking account. So I may not look, but the problem is when I do that, I exchange it for power because awareness is power. So if I don't have the awareness, I don't have the ability to control, and I can't be financially empowered if I'm living in a state of ignorance.
Yeah, and I love how many times I've heard the word just empowerment in this conversation. I think that's just one of the best words about what financial planners, what financial advisors do, and what really leads to the fulfillment and the happiness, the joy, the satisfaction in life is like money. The goal here is that money empowers goals and money empowers the dreams. It's not, the goal is not to have a lot of money. The goal is to achieve the goals. And getting in control of that, getting the awareness, as you say, leads to the empowerment versus the non-blissful ignorance that we're talking about here.
Yes.
Thanks for listening. If you have any thoughts or questions, text us at 503-893-2664. Now, back to the show.
So, you are one of the only professors or financial people I've ever heard talk about this, and I think it's something that most people, or at least a lot of people, end up doing. Talk about cars. How do you buy a car? What are some of the questions we want to ask when we're renting, buying a used car, buying a new car?
Yeah. Well, you're getting me started on a bit of a soapbox issue, so I'll try to contain my response to this. I think the reason I talk about it a lot is I have continually seen a car purchase mentioned as most individuals' biggest financial mistake. So if you ask most individuals, what is your biggest financial mistake in life, you will most often hear something about a car purchase. So I learned very often or very early on that I should probably pay attention to that because it kept coming up, and I don't think that's just random. I think there's got to be something in it. Like, what's the recipe that makes a car purchase such a potentially disastrous financial decision? And so I've spent a lot of time, thinking about that particular answer to that question. And, I would start with, and it's not really satisfying to most people because they want to jump right into the mechanics of how do I buy a car? How do I finance a car? But I think the first real important question is, what am I expecting this car to do for me? Because that's where a lot of the mistakes happen. Is we place a lot of hope in a car to satisfy things that a material object can never satisfy. Right? And it's interesting that we do this with a car more than anything else. I mean, there are certainly elements of it with clothing or a house, but there's something about a car that makes it so tempting to place a lot of hope in it, to deliver on things like my feeling of success. Like, am I successful? What do people think about me? What is my status? And do I fit in or belong to a certain group or profession? Right? My identity will often get tied up in what I drive. So these I'll be happier if I have this particular car, or I'll feel more attractive if I'm in this particular, right? So we place a lot of these emotional hopes, which often come from some deficits that are actually there in all of us. But when we step back and think about it, it's like there is no way a car can make me feel, more less insecure. Like those two things don't go together. And so, I think that's the biggest thing, Jesse, is just being honest with ourselves from the get go of like, what do I have wrapped up as far as my hopes in this car purchase? How much of it is about utility? Like, I just need this car to get me from house to work or house to grocery store or whatever. A car can deliver on that. A car can produce reliability. It can have safety. It can have convenience through electronics features, technology. It can have four-wheel drive and take me to certain places. It can hold 6 people, right? All of these things, the car can actually do. The other stuff, I think it's dangerous. I think that's why we find people that often replace cars quite often, because we as people tend to be finicky, and those things change over time. And we are left with that allure that if I just had this, then I would be fill in the blank. So, I think that's where I typically start with a car purchase, and then everything after that tends to be a lot more, just more nuts and bolts, more detailed as far as how to set yourself up for success. I think the other thing to realize is a car is a depreciating asset. So it's, again, that doesn't mean we don't buy one. That doesn't mean we don't take out a car loan. It just means that I head into this purchase knowing that I'm buying something that's losing value over time. That's a fact. And so once I realize that fact, then that may inform the way that I go about making that decision, right? So that may induce me to buy a used car instead of a new car, because the depreciation isn't as acute as it would be if I'm buying a new car, right? Or that might induce me to buy a cheaper car that is more about utility, right? So I think that depreciation, pay cash for a car. That's where a lot of people get to that. Like, I just need a car. I don't want to go into debt for something that is losing value. And so that's where a lot of individuals adopt that mentality of pay cash for a used car. That's good financial advice when we think about the practicality of what we're actually buying. The other thing that often gets people into trouble is long loan terms. So, when you buy a car, if you're going to finance that car, you're going to take out a loan, you can take out an 8-year loan on a car. So you're paying for, what is that, 96 months that I'm paying on that particular car. And, you got so many issues with that. One is what's the likelihood of wanting that car for 8 years, that car operating the way I want it to. What's the chance of me getting upside down in that loan where the car is worth less than what I owe on it? So, yeah, I think it's just a ripe area for a lot of impulsive, less probably educated decisions that give me a chance of feeling good about this in the future.
Yeah, and I'd imagine that's contributed to by additionally everybody is in that same system, or most of us are in that same system. So your neighbor and your other neighbor and your best friend all did just buy a new fancy car for the reasons you just mentioned.
Yeah.
And so it's really tempting to be like, well, now I'm inferior because I don't have this nice new car. And so
Yep.
even being aware of that, it's easy to get influence. It's easy to get just feeling like, oh my gosh, I need to get the minivan or whatever it is, whatever my peers are doing or my idols are doing or whatever they are.
Yeah, that's kind of a surefire way to realize when you're being tempted by something that is more emotional. We call it relative deprivation, and it's when I feel less, I don't feel as good about something that I have based on what somebody else has. So it has nothing to do with my car. It has everything to do with my car relative to your car. And so I'm feeling great about my car, and then my neighbor buys a new one. And if I experience my car as less of a source of happiness now, where I'm more discontent, I know that I am falling prey to that because my car did not become inferior overnight. I just feel that now because somebody else has something that becomes more of that benchmark of what should I have if I live in this neighborhood. So yeah, it's that relative deprivation that can really wreak havoc on a personal financial plan.
Yeah, especially because if you're competing with everyone you know, you're not going to have the newest car for very long
That's
because
right.
you can't beat everyone at that.
Nope. Yeah, that's that keeping up with the Joneses adage, right? That this becomes more of a self-fulfilling prophecy because if you have even two people that are doing this, where does it stop? It just continues until someone doesn't isn't driven by that particular tendency anymore.
Yeah, well. Okay, so let's walk through a hypothetical situation. So someone goes to college, they graduate after their 4-year degree. They maybe have had an internship during this time, but they were luckily there on scholarships, and so they have a little bit of debt, but not, $300,000 of debt or anything. They graduate into their first job, and they get their first salary of, we'll say, like $70,000. So a pretty good salary. They're making pretty good money. What are some of the first questions that they should ask themselves thinking about suddenly they're getting paychecks every month that are kind of a lot of money? What do they do with that?
Yeah. I would start with a very practical question, and that is, what is my take-home spendable pay? So that's a very quick clarifying tool because everybody gets anchored to the salary, especially if you've never had a salary before. And so, I'll just use an example. If I'm getting a $60,000 a year salary, it's very easy for me to start thinking about I've got $5,000 a month, right, in pay. That's true with one definition, but it's not true with the definition that I really care about, and that is what kind of money do I have to be able to spend? And that's going to be my take-home pay. So what is my check actually going to look like? And how is that going to fit within the spending plan? So that's where I always start with a very practical, maybe dose of reality of that 5,000 is now going to be 3,900. And so, yes, that's more than I've ever had, but it's a lot less than the 5,000. And let's make sure we're working from a real number. I think the second thing, individuals who are just starting out have such a tremendous asset that is not a financial asset. And it's this idea of they don't have a financial trajectory yet. They're just starting out. So once you start on a trajectory financially, it is really hard to reverse course. And if you can start out differently from the beginning, it's so much easier. So I think it really places the importance on some of these questions that we brought up earlier in this conversation. And that is questions like, why are you working anyway? So why did you go to college? And why are you going to get up at 6 o'clock 5 days a week to take this job for $60,000? Like, what's the why behind that? And really try to get to those life goals questions. Like, what do you hope to accomplish? And then that becomes more of a North Star of spending that money. So now we're back to a spending plan, and we're saying, all right, I've got this $3,900 that I can spend. How do I want to spend it? I've got the constraint now. I can't spend any more than that without getting into financial trouble. But now I have the freedom to be able to spend that money. And instead of doing it by someone else's script, now I can look at it and say, no, this is my $3,900. What do I want to do with it? What do I want to achieve? And that allows you to do some of those things. Like, now I can say, travel is really important for me. I really want to travel. Well, good. That becomes a goal. So figure out how to carve whatever percentage of that $3,900 into a travel fund, so that you can not let that be, I hope I can do this, but I'm going to do this because it's important to me and I've taken control of that from the beginning. So, I think those are some of the biggest things that I see when we start out. There's some other things that really tend to dictate someone's early financial picture. One would be trying to figure out, how do I get some kind of emergency savings set up? The sooner you can create financial margin, the better things get and the lower the level of financial stress that's in your life. And so most people that I run with don't like stress. It becomes really synonymous with their financial life. And if we can create some financial margin through a savings, that helps. The other thing is learning how to deal with periodic expenses in life. So these are big expenses like healthcare expenses, car maintenance, home maintenance, right? These things that sneak up on me and then can sometimes feel like a knockout blow in life financially. And so figuring out how to be able to handle the inevitable $2,000 car maintenance bill when it comes. If I can be proactive and think about that ahead of time, because it's coming, I just don't know when. And I don't know how much it's going to be. And that's a scary thing to have in front of me if I'm not somewhat prepared for it. So we can do that through an emergency savings program as well, or we can try to figure out how to create some way to set that money aside into something else that is designed to cover those inevitable but hard to predict expenses.
That's awesome. And one of the cool things about that is it flips those car maintenance things are probably going to ruin your day. Those are really not fun things. If we can take out the, oh my gosh, how am I going to pay for this? And just let it be, that was scary. That sucks. That was unfortunate. I'm sick. I feel bad. And just deal with that emotional side and not have to deal with the, I don't know how I'm going to pay for this and I'm going to be ruined. That is such a, compounding thing. And if we can take out one of those compounding aspects, I think it becomes a lot more manageable.
Yeah. And it will still be a bad day. I'm really concerned about not having bad months and bad years. So, I think what it does is it allows it to be just a bad day that ends and not like that was a bad year or even a bad decade. You can see people struggle with financial situations for, a period of years. So that's what we're trying to minimize.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that. Love that phrase. Bad days happen, but bad years, bad decades are
you
a
don't
lot
want
harder.
those.
Yeah. So, well, we're kind of coming up on time, Ryan, but super appreciate you coming on the podcast. Just want to ask, for our listeners, for us, are there any finance books, podcasts, other media that you think are kind of vital to have in your life or really helpful?
Well, you're asking a lifelong learner in this area. So, I would say, one, pay attention to who you are as a person. Some of us don't like the topic of money. It makes us nervous. It may bring about some trauma in our life, and I would say respect that. Don't just, take a bunch of financial podcasts or, financial books, but appreciate whatever that is. Try to figure out why this doesn't feel at all enjoyable, and really appreciate that while also not being determined to be, living financially ignorant as well. So, empowering yourself, but also not subjecting yourself to that. The other thing is to try to find maybe a genre that works with you. There are some light-hearted, more podcast financially. There are some books that, books run the spectrum of things that look like, they are Nobel, winning prize types of things, which are very hard and confusing. And there are other that are on the more popular press kind of way. So, I always recommend those things that are much easier to read. One of my favorites, we started out talking about behavioral elements of money. I love the book Why Smart People Make Big Money Mistakes and How to Correct Them. It's a really interesting read that you don't have to be intimidated by. It's an enjoyable read, but it really highlights a lot of these things that get in our way, that despite our best attempts tend to hold us back at times. And so that's one that I'm a little biased towards and like it.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. I've heard you talk about that one several times. So
we'll
awesome.
We'll have a link to that in the show description for anyone that's listening that wants to go find that easily. It'll be right there for you.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys. Appreciate the time, and always enjoy talking about these topics, and great to reconnect with both of you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ryan. Really appreciate you hopping on, and always learning more from you. So
yeah,
really appreciate it.